In this tutorial, I'll show you how you can add text that will always point towards the direction of the camera, and it can also fade in and move. This tutorial is specifically more aimed towards cinematics, but it could be used as an in-game cinematic or rendered out for an animation that you might be doing. In your content browser, in whatever folder is most appropriate for your project, I've just created a new folder called Blueprint and then Text Render. I'm going to right click in my Text Render folder and go up to Blueprint class, and I'm going to select that. Now, in all classes, search for Cine, and we can select Cine Camera Actor, and then just select that, and then call this BP Cine Camera, and now drag that into the scene. And it is basically the Cine Camera Actor, but inside a blueprint. So if we just double click on that blueprint to open it up, we've got in the viewport, we've got our camera, and it's just a component. So it's just a camera component of this blueprint. The reason that I have created this as a blueprint and not just dragged in a Cine Camera Actor from the Place Actors panel is because we in a bit are going to need to cast to this blueprint, which I will explain when we get there. So make sure that you drag this new blueprint into the level and then position it in whatever starting position that you need. Okay, so that's great. We've created a blueprint with a Cine Camera. Let's right click in the same folder again, create a blueprint, call it Actor, call this BP Text Render, double click to open it up. In the components, click Add and add a text render. And then all we'll do is in its details on the right hand side where it says horizontal alignment, we can just center it, and then we can make it a bit bigger. So world size, we can go to 50. That will do for now. Now let's click on the event graph, and in the event graph, drag off of event begin play. That's an initiation or an execution node. And what we want to execute to start with is set text, and that's going to be set the actual text that you read. So you can just do this in the blueprint where it says text render. We've got a field that says text, and you can set it there. But by doing it this way, we can duplicate this blueprint in the level, so we can have multiple instances of it, and then we can change the text per instance. If we don't do it this way, we'd have to duplicate this blueprint, which is unnecessary, because this is a more efficient, easier way to do it. So before we move on, these other two red nodes, just select and delete them. Where it says value, drag off of that, let go, and then promote to a variable. Let's just call this, so on the left hand side I can select it and press F2, and I'll just call this text and compile it. And you can see in its details on the right hand side we've now got a text field, so we could just enter a text example. That will do. And make sure this is instance editable, which we'll come to in a moment. So that will set the text for us. Now we want it to actually always face the direction of the camera. So if we now go back to event begin play, drag off of that, search for sequence, it'll automatically reconnect the set text node. I'm just going to drag that back a little bit. Where it says then one, drag off of that and search for cast to BP Cine Camera. Now this is the blueprint that we just created. It's not there by default. This is the one that we have just added, so select that. And the reason that we're doing a sequence is that event begin play will only connect to one thing at a time. So we have to add a sequence if we want to connect it in to additional things. Or at least that is one way to connect event begin play into additional nodes. So the reason that we want to cast to the BP Cine Camera is because we want to get this class and we want to get its world location. So we're just going to drag off from as BP Cine Camera, let go, and then search for get world location. And we can actually use either of these components, but let's use the camera component, and that will get the world location of the camera component. In this case, we don't need to connect anything to its execution pins, which are these two white arrows here. We can leave them empty. It does need an object though. And the object that it's looking for is the parent class of this blueprint. So this is a blueprint Cine Camera that we've just created, and we need the parent class. So to find the parent class, if we go back into the content browser where we've got our BP Cine Camera blueprint, double click on that. And if you look in the top right hand side, parent class is Cine Camera Actor. So that's the object it's looking for. So let's go back into the text render event graph, and in our variables section, click on the plus button. We could call this Cine Actor. And then click on the drop down and search for Cine Camera Actor. And the one we want is not the one we've just created, it's the parent class. So Cine Camera Actor object reference is the one that we're looking for. Select that. Now we can drag this in, get Cine Camera, and connect up to the object. We can press compile, and that should work all fine. One final thing that we'll do before we move on, let's just make it instance editable. So with it still selected, make it instance editable, as we will use that later. Okay, now to finish off, let's grab the text render from the components panel, drag that in, place it onto our graph, drag off text render. We need to get the weld location. So get weld location for this as well. And there's a special built-in function called find look at rotation. So where it says return value, drag off of that, search for find look at rotation. And that's the text render will be the start, and then the Cine Camera component will be the target. So get weld location, just drag off of the bottom one and plug that into target. And now basically what that means is that the camera will always rotate to look at the text render. Now where we've got the return value here, we do need to drag off of this, and we need to search for set weld rotation and set weld rotation text render, like so. So that basically gets the rotation or finds what the value of the rotation is, and then this node here sets it. The text render is the component that's going to be rotating. We don't actually need it twice, so I could delete this second one here, drag off of the first one and plug that into target. And finally, we do need something to set this constantly, and for that we could use an event tick. So drag off of this execution socket here, let go and search for event tick, like so. And this now is done. So I'll zoom out for a second so you can see the entire blueprint. Fairly straightforward. I'll just tidy it up a little bit. Okay, let's press compile and save. And let's go back into our third person map or whatever map or level you're using. Okay, so now we can actually test it. So let's drag in the BP text render blueprint. I'm just going to place it above the character. Now, of course, in your level, place it wherever is most appropriate for your scene. So something like that is fine. We're going to have to simulate the level for this to work. Before I do that, though, with this text render blueprint selected in its details panel near the top. So first we've got text and we've got a text field. This is where we can change the text. So I'll just call this like look at me. And this is where we made the text node instance editable. If we hadn't have done that, it wouldn't appear here. So when we actually play the game or render a cinematic, this text will change to look at me. At the moment where it says text, that's just placeholder text until we actually simulate the level. Beneath that, we've got the Cine Actor, and it needs to know what instance of this BP Cine Camera blueprint we're going to use. So click on the drop down. We've only got one, and click on that. If you have multiple instances of this Cine Camera Actor blueprint, then you can select different ones. So for example, I could duplicate this up, and then in the text blueprint, I could select the second one, but we're not going to do that. We'll just stick with one. And now that we've done that, if I simulate the level, so I'm just going to simulate. Oops, I forgot one thing. Let me just stop simulating. Because when we simulate the level, the camera disappears or it's hidden, or the camera icon, we just need to click on it. So select it and now simulate the level, and we can still see the transform gizmo or the move gizmo. And if I hold my left mouse button and drag it, you can see there. So in the level here, you can see the text is always facing the camera. If I drag it up and down like so, and that's working great. Okay, let's stop simulating the level. Okay, so before we move on to the final section, just a quick look at the text render blueprint. So if I just hold Alt and then drag this to the left, and then I change the text here to something like second text render, just as a test. And now if I press simulate, you can see it's changed the text. The text is different in each of these blueprints. I just set the camera and then simulate. You know, both of them follow the camera around. All right, I'll just delete that second instance there. And now let's go into the final stage. So let's right click in our content browser, go to cinematics and level sequence. So this is just adding the camera into a level sequence, so you could animate this and render out the footage if you wanted to, or you could have an in-game cinematic as well. So a level sequence underscore text render, and then double click to open it up. So now I'll just click on the camera blueprint, and then from the world outliner, I'm going to drag it into the level sequence. It'll automatically add a camera cuts track, which we need if we're going to render out the footage. It's also automatically piloting the camera. So now the viewport is showing the camera view, and I will just position it. I'll just do something simple. I'm just going to position it to the side of the text like so. And then let's click on the drop down arrow on the camera track. And where it says transform, I'm just going to press a button to add a new keyframe. So that position is keyframed at the start, and then I'll scrub it to the end. And then I'll just move the camera, let's say something like that. And then I'll keyframe that as well. Although I've got the auto keyframing button on, so it automatically keyframed it for me. But either way, we'll add a keyframe at the end. So that's good, that's done. Now let's click on the text render. Let's drag that from the world outliner into the level sequence. And there's a couple of things that we can do here. So the first thing is, in this track, we need to click on the plus button and then add a transform track, so we can move the text, or we can animate it moving up and down, left to right, or we can scale it as well if need be. So the final thing we can do here is just fade the text. Now, unfortunately, there isn't a built-in opacity fade or anything in the text render, so we have to do it. There's different ways we can do it, but the quickest for this is to do it via the material. So if you go back into the text render blueprint, click on the text render. On the right-hand side where it says text material, click on the little magnifying glass, and that takes us to the folder where we've actually got our default text material. Let's just duplicate it to make a new copy so we don't touch the original. So right-click, duplicate, and then you can call this V2. I'll actually call it V3 because I tested this before, but you can call that V2. And now double click to open it up. So to keep this as short as possible for this tutorial, basically this material, it's pretty straightforward. It just uses an opacity mask. And that opacity mask, the strength of it is controlled by a lerp node, which goes from -90 to 90. We can actually use the A value or the -90 value to create a fade. Now to do that, drag out from A, like so, search for dithered temporal AA. Well, we've got the alpha threshold, drag off from that. In fact, actually, it's easier just to right click on it and promote it to a parameter. And then its default value is -90. So what that does is it takes it back to its default value, but this parameter we've got here, we can now connect to this in sequencer and we can keyframe it to fade it out. So just before we move on, if I put this at like -180, yeah, it makes it disappear completely. I'll keep it on -90 and apply and save. And let's go back into our level. Now let's go back into the text render blueprint. And when we've got text render, make sure it's still selected. And in text material, click on the drop down and then select the version you just created, which would be like V2 for you. And now we've got that. That's all we need to do, compile and save. And now we can go back into our third person map, go back into sequencer. And now in the text render track, click the plus button, add text render, click on the plus button again in the text render track. We want to find the material. So we've got material parameters, element 0, click on that, and then click on that one final time. And there we've got alpha threshold, and that is the perimeter that we just created. So click on that, and now we can keyframe it fading in and out. So let me just drag the sequencer back to 0. In fact, at about, what is that, about halfway through it goes off screen. So I'm just going to drag my camera back. I'm going to position it backwards. I'm still piloting it, hence I can do it via the viewport. That should keyframe that movement automatically, like that. If not, just press in transform, just click on a new keyframe, and that'll do for now. It's a little bit janky, but for the sake of this tutorial, that looks fine. Okay, so let's just make this look a little bit more sophisticated. So in the alpha threshold, where it says -90, click on that value, put -180. Again, it will keyframe automatically, but press the keyframe button if not. Now let's scrub to about halfway, so about frame 75. Now let's change this value to -90. And then that -90 is a default value for bringing it back, for it to be opaque. If I scrub, I can see it disappearing and then fading in. And finally, perhaps as it fades in, so from about here, I want it to like kind of come down. So back into its transform, I can just drag it up in the viewport. I didn't need to select the transform track there, but either way, I'm going to drag it up. I'm going to keyframe that position, drag it to about halfway at the same point where we fade it in, drag it down, add a keyframe. So now we've got it coming down and we've got it fading in like so. Okay. And when we actually render this out, or when we play the level or simulate the level, it will follow the camera as well. So let's just test that. So let's go to File, Save All. Actually, before we do anything else, let's simulate the level. Now let's click on the play button. Oops, before I do that, I'm going to drag it back to 0 and make sure that I'm piloting the camera. So I can press that little camera icon in the level sequencer, make sure I'm at 0, and now I can press play. There you go. And at the same time, that text is always looking at the camera. So that covers it. If you've got any questions or any comments, please do leave them in the comment section. Thanks.